That's the problem.
But the exhibit will open this coming November 11th, and it'll run for 13 months.
Uh-huh.
Okay, tape is rolling.
We rolling? Okay. You ready to go? If you could, just please give me your name and where you're from.
Mack Abbott, Gainesville, Georgia.
And how long have you lived there?
I've lived there for about 4 years.
And where did you come from before that?
Tucker, Georgia.
Are you a native Georgian?
No, originally Birmingham, Alabama.
Now, some of these questions, this is a sort of a generic set of questions, so some will seem kind of silly to you. But
Well, that's all right. Ask your questions.
tell me a little bit about growing up in the days before the war.
In the days before the war, of course, we had the Depression, which was rough. I had to quit school in the 9th grade to help my mother. She couldn't support herself. So I quit school and went to work and started driving a truck in Miami. I had a commercial license the time I was 14. And I did this until I was 18. At 18, then of course the draft was on. To bring the military up to par. There wasn't any talk of war or anything like that, but they were trying to bring the military up to a better level than they had. And of course, the Marine Corps happened to be advertising at all the government buildings and so forth and saying, join the Marines and see the world. Well, that sounded pretty good to me, so I joined the Marine Corps to see the world. And from there, I went to Parris Island boot camp. Then I was sent to Quantico, Virginia to take a water engineering course. On completing the water engineering course, I was sent to Pearl Harbor. Got to Pearl Harbor, they said, well, we don't need a water engineer in our outfit. You'll be a power plant operator. But we will make you PFC, private first class, just because you went to water engineering school. Basically, everything was normal around there. We had a lot of training on identification of planes and ships, namely American and Japanese. We went on maneuvers at nighttime, but everything was just normal as far as Honolulu was concerned. We went on Liberty on weekends. And it was just, fact of the morning of December the 7th, 1941, I got up early because I was going to go take flying lessons at the local airfield. Got back from breakfast to my second floor where my bunk was, where our outfit was located. My bunk was down at the end next to a window. Two of my buddies were sitting on my bunk shooting the breeze, still in their shorts. We all slept in shorts in those days. But I was early, so I sat down and started talking to them. Then the next thing you know, we heard an explosion over at the ship area. Well, the view was blocked from my window to where the ships were. Just were old warehouses. And all of a sudden we heard this explosion and we got up and looked out the window. Thought this was probably just dynamite, and they'd been doing that in the past week. Well, about that time a plane flew right over the warehouse. It was between us and the ships, and it went right by our window, so close I could have hit it with a rock. We noticed that there were two Japanese in there looking at us and grinning. We knew then that it was we saw the insignia, knew that it was Japanese, and we knew that it was being attacked because we heard another explosion going on. The two men I was with went to get their clothes on. I was already dressed, so I grabbed my 1903 Springfield rifle, helmet, cartridge belt, and ran downstairs to the armory to get some ammunition. Well, I ran into the armory to get some ammunition. The corporal there said he couldn't give me any because I had to have a requisition. About that time, this sergeant heard him, told him to give me some ammunition. He says, well, I only have this one bandolier out, but I've got plenty of in the back storeroom. He said, well, give him that bandolier. So I took the bandolier, run out on the parade field out in front of our barracks and started firing at the planes as they come over the warehouses. We were taught then that the Japanese planes did not have any armament, so always shoot at the pilot. In about 15 minutes, there was possibly 20 men out there firing, but I was out there alone for about 15 minutes and getting one or two possible shots off at a time. At the end of the attack, by the way, I'd like to mention that the Navy gave us credit for shooting down 3 of the 29 planes shot down that day with our 03 rifles. But a couple of the men got in a truck and went over to see one of the planes, and they came back with the wing off of that plane, and they put it in front of our barracks so people could get souvenirs. And they said that the pilot had 9 holes in him, but they all looked the same, so they didn't know which one of us put the 9 holes there. So about that time, a truck drove up and said we need a couple of men over to the docks. So 2 of us jumped on the back of the truck and went over to the docks, and we started pulling men out of the water, and boats would come up and we'd help the men out and put them in the back of the truck, took them over to the hospital. But the hospital was full, so we had to lay them out on the ground. There were a number of corpsmen there that were attending to them, and one nurse supervising what they do, the category that they'd be in, who would be next to going to the hospital where all the nurses were assisting the doctors. We made a number of trips like that, and then there were other trucks doing the same thing. And we went back to the barracks, and there was a notice on the bulletin board for me to report for guard duty. I was taken out to the tank farm, which they didn't hit, and told them, that this is one of the places they forgot and they might try to sabotage it. Well, I went out there, and then, of course, that nighttime, a couple of fires could be spotted in the sugarcane fields out in the distance. We thought that might be a signal for maybe an attack. We didn't know. But anyhow, the next day, I heard that the MPs went around collecting all of the Japanese on the island that had been to Japan in the past 6 months or had dual citizenship. And they were put in a concentration camp and fed well and housed. I know that a few years ago they did pay $20,000 to each one of those people that they had put in turn. Well, after that, one morning I was told to be ready at midnight to leave. And they put us aboard an old converted 4-stack destroyer. We pulled out at daylight, and we were told to go below because they had picked up 2 subs just outside the gate. And so it wasn't long before they were dropping ash cans on the subs, but they didn't get one. But one of the other destroyers in our convoy did get one of them. The other one got away. Well, we went on to Wake, where we were supposed to go reinforce Wake. We got within 300 miles of Wake, and we were told to be very quiet below deck, that we were in the middle of the Japanese fleet and they were in the process of taking Wake Island. So our convoy split up at that point, and our destroyer took us to Palmar Island down by the equator. Well, we was there for a while, and then one day I had a call from the top sergeant saying, "Abbott, aren't you a water engineer?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, the officer on duty wants you to go to Midway because they're broadcasting that they got a water problem up there, and we're going to radio them to be prepared that we're sending you up there to fix their problem." Well, I didn't know it till I got there, and when I got to Midway, they told me they didn't have a water problem, but we were going to be attacked So they said, here's a 50 caliber machine gun, put sandbags around it, which they did, and I fired at the planes as they come over. I know I didn't hit one because I didn't know how to lead one. Never fired a 50 caliber machine gun in my life. But I scared a few of them maybe. After they attacked there, then the ship came in to pick us of the 3rd Defense up that were at Pearl Harbor to take us to Guadalcanal. But let me back up a second. I didn't know anything about how I was used as a pawn on this advertising or radioing about water engineer until I saw the movie Midway. Here a few years ago I saw the movie, and then first time I realized, well gosh, I was used as a pawn on that thing. But anyway, I joined my old outfit that I was with at Pearl Harbor at Guadalcanal. Our group was one of the first to land. I was in the 1st Division at that time, but still the 3rd Defense. I spent several months there, about 3 months, and then they ran short of people. Several men gotten killed in our outfit that was over Tulagi, a nearby island. So they sent me over there. I was, at that time, referred to as a Browning automatic rifleman, which every time you pull a trigger, it would fire 3 shots. But originally at Guadalcanal, we couldn't use my BAR because we were short of ammunition. Our ships had to leave early because they had reported that the Japanese were on the way, and so at that time we didn't get all of our equipment or a lot of food and ammunition. So we had to kind of do without for a while till we were able to be reinforced. But the odd part about it is that the Japanese kept reinforcing their people from the opposite side of the island. They kept landing there, and it was said that we were outnumbered 10-1, and that they wanted the island very bad for the airfield because it was their intentions to not only take China, which they had already done, but they had to have Australia and all the islands in the Pacific. Once they had that, then they could attack the United States. The United States would most likely give up about that time. Well, this was their thought. But our people were just determined that they wouldn't get Guadalcanal. After I was there for about 7 months, the Army came in and relieved us. And I was sent back to the States to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, where my commanding officer was there to form a new outfit, and he said he had requested 4 of us from his old outfit to form this new one that he wanted to form, which would be the 18th. Well, he said, but I don't have any men as yet. So he said, Abbott, I want to send you on to Japanese school, and maybe we'll have some men by the time we get back. And when I did get through Japanese school, I went back and reported in. And he said, well, we still don't have any men, so I'm going to send you to the Army because I'm going to put a small radar in your unit also. So I went to the Army, and well, I guess they didn't understand anything. At that time, I had been made corporal because he couldn't give us 2 ranks at one time to make a sergeant and section lead, so he gave us corporal and said 30 days later he'd make us sergeant. But anyhow, I was corporal when they sent me to this Army school. Well, I walked in there, and the sergeant came up to me and said, say, by the way, you're on mess duty tonight. Non-commissioned officers do not do mess duty, and I'm a corporal. He didn't like that, so he went to the commanding officer of the school. Next thing you know, I had a call to come over and see him. Well, I went over to see him, and I walked in. His door was open, so I walked in with my hat in my hand and stood at attention in front of him. And he looked up at me and he says, aren't you going to salute me? I said, no, sir. Don't you salute in the Marine Corps, he said. Not when a building like this and in an office. We just extended attention. He didn't say anything, so I go on back to your barracks. Well, I completed school, and I called up the motor pool, told him I'd like to have a Jeep to go back to catch my bus, which was about 3 miles from the gate. And he said, sorry, I don't have anything. Now, it might be several hours before I might even have something, so you'll have to walk it. I said, whoa, wait a minute, let me read you my orders. It says here that on completion of school, that you will furnish me transportation back to the gate to catch a bus to go back to my outfit. They had a Jeep there in about 3 or 4 minutes and took me back to the base. Well, we went back and we had men there, so we started training. We went over to the other side of the river, and we spent a year training these new men. And then we went to San Diego, where we were supposed to catch a boat, but they put us in what they call Camp Lejeune. I know, Camp Elliott, the name of it. At Camp Elliott, they had no hot water. It was wintertime. And you can imagine trying to shower and shave in cold water in wintertime. What I did, of course, and what a lot of them did, we'd go downtown to the YMCA to take our showers and shaves. But after there for a short period of time, we did go aboard ship. And we got as far as Inuit, where they had already secured the island, but they went into the harbor. And we were there for a little over a week, waiting for our convoy. We swam off the boat, and that's about all we did. Pretty soon, we were running short on rations, so they started feeding us sea rations, and we didn't have to shower in salt water, using saltwater soap. Well, pretty soon a convoy did form, and we went and landed at Saipan. Saipan was a little different from any other engagement in that the Army, MacArthur insisted that the Army come in on one of our invasions, so they decided to allow them to come in on Saipan. Well, the program was to where the 4th Division and the 2nd Division would take the outer perimeter, and the Army would take the inner section between us. And we'd all go at the same pace and end up at the other end of the island. Well, the Army had a general called Smith, and our general was called Howling Mad Smith. He was quite a character. Anyway, the Army did get way behind, and his excuse was that he was saving men, when in reality he was costing us men because the Japs were getting in behind us. Well, Howland Mad Smith went aboard ship, talked to the admiral, told him the problem, and so they replaced him with another Army general who was told to keep up, and he did. And so we ended up at the end of the island secured. Well, there's another island that wasn't very far away. It was in sight, in fact. They called Tinian. So here we got in landing barges, and our group landed over at the main dock area where the city was. It was in ruins at this time. The coxswain on the boat told us to look up over the side there as we were getting in close to shore, and there were floating bodies everywhere of namely women and children. But the boat just pushed them aside and went ashore, and we went there and joined our other outfit that came in from another direction, and we moved on to the other end of the island, which didn't take us but about a month to secure that island. And then I was told to set up my camp at the very end of the island there on the cliff, using the cliff as background so we couldn't be attacked from behind. And we put barbed wire all around our place. Well, we were there for a while. Of course, the island was now secured. One day I had a call from Lieutenant Colonel Curgis. He was a lieutenant colonel then, but his headquarters was at Saipan, but he's in charge of the Marines at Saipan and Tinian. And he told me to shine the searchlight that I had in my group out over the water every night at a given time and a given azimuth, which I did. Well, the Japs didn't like that the first night. They tried to put the light out. So I had to put barbed wire further out and make a perimeter further away from us to not make it so easy for them to try to put out the light. Well, in those types of lights, searchlights, you had to hit them dead center in order to put them out. You could hit the mirror all you wanted to and it wouldn't affect it. So anyway, they gave us a little trouble, but pretty soon they says, okay, don't shine the light out anymore. We're not going to make any more raids. They were losing planes at nighttime is the reason why, for the light. They couldn't find the island. I had a call from Colonel Courageous, it was about 2 weeks later, and said, say, Abbott, you won't believe this, but the Army gave your group a citation, letter of commendation for the trouble you had to put up with the Japanese. And we got a good laugh out of that. But it wasn't long before he says, okay, you are assigned to the 5th Division, so come on down towards the dock. A ship will be in pretty soon to pick you up for your next invasion, which will be scheduled for November the 1st, Kyushu. That's where you're going. Well, I moved down next to a Army base, air base, near the airport, which is near the docks, so we could use their facilities and eat with them and so forth, which we did. And one day, Lieutenant Courageous called me and says, Abbott, I need you to go up there to where some of the keys were and get a prisoner and tell him that they had surrendered Saipan and Tinian and that they should give up and we would take them as prisoners of war. And so I took 7 men, told them not to fire, but we were going to try to pick up someone up there to tell them to tell the rest of them to give up. Well, we got up there and got behind some rocks and men spread out. And I called out in my best Japanese language that I had learned, but I'd forgotten a lot of it. I think it was my southern accent, so as soon as I called out for them to surrender, the guy fired at me. Well, I so happened to already had a bead on him because I saw he had a rifle on his knees. And I shot him, and then they all fell into a hole. It was right in front of a cave. So we turned around and left and went back to camp. When we got back to camp, we noticed a platform had been put up between our tents and the Army tents. So I walked over there to see what was going on because the crowd was starting to gather. And one of the men said that was Colonel Tibbets and General Spaatz. So Colonel Tibbets started saying, well, we just dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and we think it was so powerful, did such destruction, that this should mean the end of the war. And then Spaatz gave him a medal for flying the atomic bomb. I went back to my tent and called Courageous, and I told him, you know, what I'd heard from Colonel Tibbets, and he said, well, goodness gracious, don't do anything. Let's just wait and see what happens. Sure enough, the war ended in a week. And so after that, the war was over. I went back to Houston. Well, I went to Houston for the first time. My father had moved there. He had gone back in the Army. He was in World War I, but he went back in World War II, but they wouldn't let him go overseas. So he had already gotten his discharge, and he had started his business and moved to Houston. Well, I went to live with him, and I went to University of Houston after taking a test to get in. And we never talked about the war. They were mostly all veterans going on the GI. And, of course, none of them were anyone that I knew back overseas. So we just never talked about it. Well, not too long after there, I got married and had children, lived in Houston. Well, then I was moved finally to Atlanta, where I retired at 75 because my wife had been awful sick and I had to stay home with her. So I went ahead and retired. Well, at this time, it was advertised in the paper about the Pearl Harbor Survivor Association was going to have a dinner at a hotel. So I told my wife, well, you know, I think I'll go down there and see if there's anybody I know. So I went down to the hotel, and sure enough, there were 3 men there that I knew. They were in the same outfit, but not, in other words, they wasn't in my battery. But we were in the same outfit, and we got along pretty good. From that time on, I started giving a lot of talks. People call and want us to give talks to different groups, civic groups, veteran groups, and so forth, which I did. And then it came about where a friend of mine had an idea about building a monument and putting it out to the National Military Cemetery in Marietta. So he got us all together and told us, you know, what he wanted to do and where he wanted to put the monument. Well, one day he called me from the hospital. He says, well, they put me back in the hospital, but I'll be home tomorrow and I'd like for you to come out. I need to talk to you. So I went out to his house. He told me that he was told that he didn't have long to live and that he wanted me to promise him to carry on his idea about a monument at the National Military Cemetery to commemorate the Georgia Pearl Harbor survivors. So I did. I raised $14,000 for this monument. It only cost $10, so I had $1,000 for decorating with bushes around it, flowering bushes, and for bricks. What I did, I put 300 bricks in front of it in an oval shape in front and on the side of the monument. And then what I was going to do is start putting in the names of those that first were killed at Pearl Harbor, and then from Georgia, and then every year all the Georgia Pearl Harbor survivors that died, I would put their name and outfit on a brick, on a particular colored brick, with a date on it, and put this at the end so that anybody in years to come would know the date that that relative died, and they could go to that colored brick and they would find his name. And every year since that time, I use a different colored brick, and right now I'm getting ready to install 21 bricks at the National Military Cemetery at Marietta. And then on Sunday before Memorial Day, the cemetery has devoted that day to us and no other veteran groups, so that we wouldn't be bothered with any interruptions. And we have people from several states that come to this memorial that we have on Sunday before Memorial Day every year. This is something that I'm very proud of, and now my son is helping me do this, and one of them is, and he will continue this after I'm gone. We have a Pearl Harbor survivors lunching and meeting every other Saturday, or every other month it is, on a Saturday at 12 o'clock at the American Legion Hall there at Snellville. They prepare food for us and help us clean up, and they've been very good to us. In fact, they even gave me a key to the place so that anything we wanted. But they take very good care of us, and we appreciate it very much. Namely, what we do there is have our lunch every other month, and we have a guest speaker usually every other meeting, because on the odd ones we'll have one of our Pearl Harbor survivors to tell his story about what he did at Pearl Harbor. Basically, that's it, and I'm very happy with what I do. I still give a lot of talks to veteran groups, schools, and civic groups. And I've got a book that I sell. I call it Fired the First and Last Shot of World War II. The first shot being at Pearl Harbor. The second shot was, of course, at Tinian, which I call the first and last shot. Now, I went back for the 60th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, and the Marine Corps had our group, it was about 80 of us, to come early, 3 days early than the Pearl Harbor Survivors meeting. They put us up at the hotel, and they picked us up in buses, and they took and brought us to the barracks, and they fed us, and then they took us over to the airstrip, and then they laid out all the latest weapons that they had in the Marine Corps today. And on the third day, we were at lunchtime, and then my old commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Curtis, was now Major General. He stayed in and went on to Major General. So he was sitting across the table from me at lunchtime, and he yelled out, "Abbott, I know you fired the first and last shot of World War II, but it don't mean a damn thing as far as the Marine Corps is concerned." Everybody got a big laugh out of that. But that night, after supper, we went out on the parade ground where they had rolled out bleachers out on the parade ground, and we all went down and sat down. And I think they had 3 generals there to give a little talk about how much they appreciated what we did. And then the Commodore of the Marine Corps, 4-star General, he was the last one to speak. He got up and he says, the reason why that he had our group of Marines there is because our group of Marines had seen more action than any group of Marines in the history of the Marine Corps, and they were proud of us. Then we broke up, and the base commander had his home right at the edge of the parade field. And we went over there, and they had in the backyard hors d'oeuvres and drinks and things like that. And everybody got a chance to talk with the commandant, and it was really rewarding to us. Then they took us back to hotel. So it's been a wonderful life for me, and I still just am real proud to talk to these schools and the veteran groups, or anyone that will really listen to me. They can give me a group. Now, what's your question?
Okay, I have several. Go back to Pearl Harbor for just a moment.
All right.
If you could, try to describe what was going through your head and through your gut when you saw that Japanese pilot go by and grin at you.
The truth of the matter is, I didn't think. As soon as I saw that it was a Japanese plane, we knew that it was Japanese. I grabbed my rifle, and my only concern was to get ammunition and start firing at them. It was just instinct. I suppose it's the way we were trained in the Marine Corps.
When that, at the close of that Sunday, at the end of the December 7th, did you realize that something had happened there that day that would change the world?
Not in that sense. I really had no thought about the world. The only thing my thought was where I was at Pearl Harbor. That they did a lot of damage to the ships. That they didn't land, but they could land. They said we had already set up perimeters along the waterways and with barbed wire in case they did land. And I was on guard duty at the tank farm. So it was a possibility. I didn't even really think about it too much, and other than just to try to keep alert to any movements among the tanks. That's about all. I got quite hungry, though, because they didn't show up for a couple of days to pick me up.
The Japanese, having been at Pearl Harbor and at Guadalcanal and at Tinian, you certainly have a unique point of view. What did you think about your enemy?
First off, I'd like to say that the Japanese were very clean people. I'd seen caves where their clothes were folded and they packed, some of them had packs on that would be just packed very nicely and clean. they seemed to be real clean people, number one. Number two, they were the enemy. And I tell you, I used to think that they were small people, but I saw some a lot bigger than I was, which were the Marine group of the Japanese. I have never hated them other than the fact that they were the enemy, and I never thought about it in shooting at them. I saw many dead bodies laying around, a lot of them with their heads blown off, some shot up pretty bad. It didn't bother me after a while, and I just didn't give it any thought. After the war, I'd see a Japanese, I'd shake his hand if I had the chance. How do you do? Just like anybody else. Yes, I forgave them for what they did, because I know that they were taught this. And we can go back in history to 1930, when the Japanese military academy required all cadets to write a thesis on how they would invade America and what would be the end results. In 1931, of course, they invaded, or rather they started to bomb China, and then the United States didn't say anything about it, so in 1937 they invaded China and Manchuria. Then they started committing many acts of violence, and it's just horrible, some of the things that they did. The United States did object to this, and they didn't, so that's when they really got into it with them, and war was declared.
About the again, your unique point of view being on Tinian. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on the dropping of the atomic bomb.
Well, I have to go back on the dropping atomic bomb when I was first heard about it, and I called my commanding officer, Colonel Curtis, and told him, and he asked me then, he said, "Well, Abbott, what in the world is an atomic bomb?" And I said, "I haven't the faintest idea." But I did find out there was a Quonset hut right in back of my tents over there on the airstrip. Is where they put the thing together, and I didn't know it. I ate with the guys, I used their facilities, and no one ever indicated to me anything about an atomic bomb. So I really had no thought of it, so I didn't know what the end results were as far as view. I didn't see television. We didn't have television. And so only what I'd heard, that it did a lot of damage and killed a lot of people. And that this was going to be the end of the war. Of course, actually what it meant is it saved a lot of people, a lot of Japanese and a lot of Americans, because if we had landed at Kyushu, there would have been a massacre. So it did save a lot of lives.
What effect did serving in the military during World War II, what effect did that have on your life?
It had the effect on my life in that the training I had as a Marine was good. My time in the service on the islands, fighting the Japanese, served to make me a better man. For instance, on Guadalcanal, our first major engagement, I learned to pray, and I prayed a lot. It just did a lot for me as a person. And of course, I didn't talk about these things to other people after I got out of the service, because I didn't think at that time anyone would be able to understand anything I said. Consequently, why talk to them about it? So I, like so many others that still do not talk about it, is because they feel the same as I did at that time, that people wouldn't understand really some of the problems that you had. Some people can talk about it, but a lot can't.
What made you want to start talking about it?
What made me want to start talking about it is joining the Pearl Harbor Survivor Association and they getting requests to give talks to veteran groups and so forth. And this is when I started talking. In fact, now they can't shut me up.
Tell me a little bit about the GI Bill as far as you personally are concerned and what effects you think it had on the nation.
Oh, the GI Bill was wonderful. Right away, I got to go to school. I would have never gotten an education without the GI Bill. And as far as that's concerned, buy a home. Of course, the government, secured the loan on your home, your first home. And gosh, I wouldn't have had a home right away if I hadn't had GI Bill.
Obviously, there were a lot of effects that World War II had on the United States, socially, economically, politically, both domestically and in the world.
This is true.
Tell me what you think are what's the one or two things where the effects were the furthest reaching?
Well, the thing is that after the war, a lot of men came back. A lot of industry came out. It hired people, with veterans with a college education. You had to have a college education to get a job, really. That's the reason why I went to college. But what it did for this country is it really helped build a country to be proud of. We have to think back for one thing, and that is that this country was built on people coming to our country from foreign countries, and that's what it's been made up of. And we have to think that the war helped us to get in a position so that everyone would have a chance at a job. And we just hope that even today that people will recognize that a lot of men have been killed in war, and we hope that and pray that none of it was in vain. In fact, the Pearl Harbor Survivors has a motto: remember Pearl Harbor, keep America alert.
A lot of kids, adults too, but are going to come and see this exhibit, and there are going to be literally thousands and thousands of people there. And knowing that, what do you want to tell them? What do you want them to know, and what do you want them to remember?
What I want for the children to remember is that not only in World War II, but the other wars, Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf, the other wars, and even over at Iraq, where they're having a lot of trouble still, that these military people some of them are giving their lives for them. And we want them to know and appreciate these veterans when they come home or when they know or see them. And anything that the children can do is to study about them. Now, we know that there's very few books in the libraries and in schools on, for instance, World War II or any of the other wars. Very little information. But if they would pick up a book at the library, these books are at libraries. And if they would just get these books and read them and learn to appreciate what these veterans have done for this country.
Along those lines, do you think that the United States of 2004 has earned and is worthy of the sacrifices made 60 years ago?
Yes, in one sense. It's it bothers me quite a bit of some of the problems that they're having today. Namely, example is the workman over there that's trying to do a job for the government. They are not given the protection that they should have. The Army is protecting them, or that's what the newspapers tell us. But it's my feeling that if they put a detachment of Marines in there with those workers that are trying to rebuild, and any time that they had a problem with snipers, is to kill them and let them know that these men are going to be protected. And of course, if they can take any captives, to turn them over to a local judge or body of law that will convict them fairly. Now, of course, I know in other cases where they're having to send Marines and, of course, Army, that I feel like the Marines are the best trained for this type of work, going in there and doing something about it.
What one experience that you had seems to stand out from all the other ones, and why?
Well, gosh, I had so many experiences. It's really a difficult question, which one. I had some good experiences and some bad ones. A funny one is when I was on Tinian. You have to see, we have a shower that's usually put up by the CBs. They usually, every time we set up a camp somewhere, they come in and put up a 55-gallon drum and a shower head in there for us to take a shower. And there was one day that I was walking out nude. We all walked around naked there. We never thought about anything else, with a towel over my shoulder, walking in some soap, going out to the shower. And about that time, a Jeep drove up, and it had 2 officers and 2 Red Cross women in there, and they drove right up in the middle of our camp. Well, when they took one look at me, they just backed up and turned around and left. And I didn't think anything about it, but I got a good laugh out of it, and so did the other men. There's a lot of funny things happened. And of course, we had one of the worst things I ever had was when one of the men in the outfit that was next to me had his man was castrated right in the cave right below where our camp was. And I went over and helped to get him out of the cave. That upset me quite a bit, something of that nature. But it was things that we had to put up with. Sometimes the Japanese soldiers would dress up like civilians, and they might come out of a cave with a few women that natives that they'd had in the cave with them, and they'd try to walk up to you. And in one case, and it wasn't my outfit, it was another outfit that was next to me. One of the women got up real close there and threw a hand grenade at the group, and it wounded a couple of them there before they had a chance to do anything about it. And they had to shoot, I think they shot all of them in that group. These are things that just happened during the war. Atrocities just numerous.
Tell me just a little bit about the feelings you had for the men you served with.
The men that, of course, I first had to serve with when I was Guadalcanal he was a what we call a China Marine. He'd had experience with the Japanese, and he knew his stuff. He was a sergeant that I had the deepest respect for. and I'd say that he probably saved my life a number of times. So this is where I learned a lot about fighting in the jungles, which there was a lot of jungles there, Guadalcanal, and swamp. And it rained there constantly. There was a lot of malaria there, and dengue. I did get a case of the dengue, which is a mild form of malaria, and I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. But the experience that I had with all the men that I was with, we all had a job to do and never gave it another thought.
Why should future generations remember yours?
Well, if they don't, we're going to be in bad shape, because the officers that they have today have to have backing. They have to have men in government positions, in the Senate, in the Congress, that understands the situation. If they don't, the military is going to go down, way down. We won't have enough ships out there. There won't be enough men in the service to man those ships. Airplanes are going to be robbed of parts, and then they won't have near as many planes to fly missions that are necessary to fly. They've got to be aware of what could happen to this country if we were not prepared under any circumstances.
I've got one last question, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. In your experience, what was the worst thing about combat?
The worst thing about combat, it's because you're killing people on both sides. There are a lot of wounded, and that have to be tended to. I've seen where they would get a bulldozer and just push bodies up and dig a hole and just push them into a hole for temporary reasons. You see so much of that. It's a horrible thing, but you don't really give it much thought after a while. And I don't give it much of a thought today.
That's about it. Is there anything we haven't covered or spoken of that you would like to address?
No, I think you've done an excellent job in putting this together, and if I can be of further service, give me a call. And of course, you can buy my book if you want to.
Actually, probably. I guess we're good. That's
You can show them.
yeah. Let's get a shot of him with the book. Just tell us just
All right.
a little bit about the book.
This book I wrote. My wife died after about 15 years of illness, and a number of my friends knew that I had a lot of experience during the war, and suggested that I write a book before I forgot what happened. Well, I decided to write a book, but I didn't know how to write a book. So one day I was up at the library in Gainesville, and I was talking to this one attendant up there in the library, and I told him I wanted to write a book, but I didn't know how to write it. I didn't know what to say. And he says, well, let me write it for you. And I says, all right. So what we did, we sat down, he asked questions, and then he just pulled information out of me that I never thought I had in me. And this is the way the book was written. Of course, every time I would write a number of pages and give it to him to edit, he'd always change it around and put something else there, and I'd tear out about half of it, and I didn't want any cursing in it. Number one, I want it to be read by children, women, families, and I felt that that was the only way to do it. And that's the way the book was written, about my life, starting back during the Depression and all the way through World War II and up through the monument. Now, there's one thing that I found out not too long ago about that's in this book, is everyone thought that President Roosevelt knew about Pearl Harbor before it happened. I didn't have the faintest idea. I didn't think he did. But it came out in the British archives who did know, and that was Churchill. It was called a JN 25 code that they had that belonged to the Germans, Italians, and the Japanese. And they had broken the code. So they knew when they were going to attack. And then when Churchill saw that Pearl Harbor was going to be attacked, he couldn't say anything to to President Roosevelt, because he knew that they were getting ready to surrender to Germany. And if he kept his mouth shut, then the United States would get into war after Pearl Harbor. So this is exactly what happened, and Churchill kept quiet about it to save his country. And then when Midway came up, he got a code message that they were going to attack Midway. He couldn't tell Roosevelt, because if he did, then Roosevelt would know that he knew about Pearl Harbor. So he had to keep his mouth shut about that one.
How does that make you feel?
Well, I put myself in Churchill's position where he had his country to think about, and I think I would have done the same thing. I think you would too. Now, this book, of course, is written about myself during the Depression and my time during my life up until a few years ago. My wife died about 4 years ago when I started writing this, and then I met a lady at church, and we got married. And so I decided to write another chapter and put in this latest issue that I just bought, and I call it My Life in the 80s. And the book is selling good. In fact, I don't sell it through any stores anymore. I sell them only direct. And people that would call me, that's Mack Abbott. I'll be very happy to send them a book.
Okay. All right. I think that's good.